Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today, Amber and Chelsea.
Thanks for having us.
We're really excited to talk to you because you really have a strong background in helping women. And you are both licensed marriage and family therapists. And you've taken that in and your career through the Women's Productive Mental Health Program at UCSD. And from there, you were able to build something beautiful. And would you mind telling us a little bit more about your reason for starting Sparks Mamas and how that helps women?
Yeah. So Chelsea and I met at UCSD where we work in the Women's Reproductive Mental Health Program. And in our work there together, we work with women during pregnancy and postpartum, infertility, pregnancy loss, any sort of reproductive journey. And we see their families as well through that process. And I think through that course of our work there, we just, like many people who work in this field, started to see all the different gaps in care that exist, and just the ways that, that we think everyone's trying to do their best, that we're failing mothers in different ways. And we just started kind of coming up with some innovative ways to see how we could potentially care for mothers in a different way, and started kind of had this idea about Spark Mamas. We were finding that even when we were trying to refer people out to some of these providers in the community, that we know they needed like a lactation consultant or a postpartum doula or any of these resources, they often wouldn't follow through with them. And there's lots of reasons for those barriers, some of them being financial, some of them being mother guilt, some of them being just mothers are just not necessarily always thinking about taking care of themselves first. And our culture tends to prioritize babies over mothers. So we were trying to sort of think about different ways that we could reduce some of those barriers, and came up with this idea of creating a registry for mothers versus just babies, and using that as a way to connect them to really vital resources that they need in the community. So all of our providers and partners and our gifts are women-owned businesses. Most of them are mothers. And so every time they add one of those gifts onto their registry, they're going to get connected to that person in the community. And then that gift actually gives back to a nonprofit in the community where we support mothers in need, because we recognize that not everybody can actually afford the services that we might be offering in different capacities. And we were hoping that by them adding that to the registry, that people would buy those gifts for mothers that they really need, and that they'd start thinking about themselves in the context of that. Like, what do I actually need as I'm transitioning to this? Not just what does my baby need, more clothes, but how do I take care of me that lessens my stress, that then allows me to take care of our families? And so it took us a really long time, like 5 years. We had a little spark of an idea, and then it was just every Sunday, Chelsea and I would work for 2 hours with growing our own businesses and our families, and just sort of pushed it along. And then COVID happened, and we had a lot of delays in that. And then we finally launched a year ago, well, a little over a year ago now, in December of last year. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that Amber and I saw really one-on-one with our clients is that by the time we met a lot of our moms during their postpartum journey, their mental health had already kind of declined. And so we thought if we could get our moms thinking about what they needed in the postpartum period before they were actually in it, we could have a better chance of protecting their mood. We know that women during that first year postpartum are more vulnerable for a mental health condition than at any other time over their journey. And so we really feel, as Amber mentioned, that as much as we're trying to do to take care of our moms, we recognize it, we identify it, we have therapists that specialize in perinatal mental health. Just seeing your OB one time after you deliver just isn't enough, right? And so getting connected to a pelvic floor therapist or getting connected to a massage therapist or a lactation consultant can really help with those pieces of education, support, and holding that we know that all new moms need and deserve.
Yeah, I think it also just for us, we're hoping that it starts this pathway for them where they go and do the first time, and then they're like, okay, you know what? This is actually really important. I came back feeling better. And when I come back feeling better, I have more resources, more bandwidth to be able to manage all of the different pieces that mothers have the burden of holding for.
That makes so much sense because we get so much advice when we're pregnant and first have children that we're like, blindsided by all of this stuff, and then of course our own, but if we're taking care of ourselves and we're in our best mental health, we can make those choices for ourselves that are intuitive. Like we can listen to the advice, but choose what feels right for us. I love that.
And even I think that decision, we see that decision fatigue feeling really overwhelming for mothers and not knowing where to begin. And so part of what we're hoping is by, Chelsea and I vet all of these different practitioners. We've worked with them in the community for a long time. So it takes away some of that decision fatigue around, okay, I know I need this, but now where do I even begin with that piece of it that I think is another barrier to them just being like, you know what, I'll deal with that later. I don't have time. I don't, it just feels too overwhelming.
And as
Yeah.
a new postpartum mom, most of my baby registry was actually Spark Mama's Gifts. And I have to say, it was absolutely amazing to have, to head into the postpartum period with all my appointments lined up. So I had a lactation consultant appointment on the books. I had a pelvic floor consultation on the books. I had a massage on the books, and those pieces really helped just make me go, okay, when I get to 6 weeks postpartum, I know I'm going to have somebody help me with this. Or if I have any questions, I know that this person's going to be able to help me with this. And I think that is something, as Amber mentioned, right? We will be willing to spend that money when baby's in utero. It's a lot harder to do that and to create that time once baby's earthside. And we know that those things not only just help with the physical adjustment, but they also help kind of, protect that ever-changing identity shift that happens where all of a sudden baby is on the forefront and you're kind of in the back seat. And that's really, really hard for moms. And it's something that just the act of knowing that you're going to go out and take care of yourself and that you were able to successfully orchestrate childcare or bring baby with you is huge in terms of confidence building and giving yourself the permission to continue to do that throughout your postpartum journey.
I love this so much because this is really what we want to do here of take care of mama because she's the one who takes care of everyone else, right? We use this analogy a lot of putting on our own oxygen mask first. Like when you're in an airplane and they tell you if the oxygen mask come on, put yours on first and then help out other people who are dependent on you, right? And so this is really celebrating what you are all doing is really celebrating mama and making sure that she's taken care of so then she can in turn take the best care that she can of baby. And I saw on Sparks Mama that you have a shirt that says it's Mother's Day every day. And I was like, yes, thank you. Somebody who gets it. I'm not even a fan of Mother's Day because I'm like, I don't need a day to tell me what I do every day, right? So I really just love how you've taken it from a different aspect of everybody's so excited for baby and they want to be with baby and hold baby but there's so much more that goes into this and being able to provide support, but also it takes so much time and energy to vet all of these people. And so a lot of times I find myself procrastinating that of like, I just do not have space for figuring that out right now, right? Like I'm looking to move to a new formula right now. I'm on 2 cans left right now. Like I don't have space to figure out this new formula right now. So I just keep procrastinating it, right? And so you have this registry that really has great people that they're able to turn to. And that I think takes off a lot of the anxiety of the planning and the what ifs and asking for help. So thank you.
And I think something too that we see a lot of is that oftentimes we'll see mothers at a certain stage in the postpartum period and you can ask them, what do you need? And they have no idea. They're just so overwhelmed, they don't even know. And so part of what we envisioned for our site was people actually going on there while they were pregnant and started going, hey, you know what? I might need a meal delivery service because when my toddler comes home from school and my baby is crying and going through witching hour, I don't want to have to make dinner. And that's gonna help me. I didn't even think about the fact that I might need that. And so it allows them to actually start thinking about some of the needs they might have because they feel like they can't even put into words sometimes what it is they actually need. And it's like this, well, just tell me what you need and then I'll help you. It's like, I don't know what I need, right? And so part of it is helping them figure that piece out. which I think is also a huge, it gives them permission to even think about it before they're even at that point, which I think is helpful, hopefully.
Mhm. And I love this too, because we work with this kind of mindset as well of like, yeah, we could hit rock bottom. We could wait until, you know, our drinking is so severe that nothing is operating, and then we'll address it. Or we could start implementing things in there now to start taking care of yourself and start finding other healthier ways to navigate stress and challenges, right? And that's really why we're bringing this and putting this together. And so with baby comes a huge shift in dynamics and roles and identity, like you mentioned. And, you know, how do we, in a healthy way, navigate this huge change that I don't think that we're really necessarily prepared for because we haven't experienced it yet? We don't know, like we can read all the books and everything, but you don't know until you're in it. So, is there any way to kind of adjust? Do you have any tools for that?
Yeah, as Amber and one of the things that Amber and I do as maternal mental health therapists is really always try to involve the partner. Typically, when a woman is going to their OB appointments, you know, she's the patient, and dads or partners are often left out of the equation. And then once baby's earthside, right, baby becomes the patient, and moms are and partners are somewhere in the back, right? So one of the things that Amber and I try to do is bring partners into session. And we do that early on and starting to think about like, what do you want your postpartum period to look like? How will things change? How will things be different? So starting to have those questions, I don't know, around 28 weeks gestation, right? So because once you get further along in your pregnancy, you're going to start thinking about the details of birth. So capturing them in a space where you can start to say, how are things now and how is that going to shift once baby's here, right? We know that babies are fill the home with a lot of love, but they're also incredibly stressful. And because we're going to get hit with sleep deprivation, we're going to get hit with the division of household labor, we're going to get hit with the division of childcare. We're going to have to manage family and friends who goes back to work, negotiating other children in the home. So Amber and I start having these conversations and then actually encourage our couples to fill out a postpartum plan. And on that postpartum plan, we talk about how are we going to manage sleep, right? How is that going to look in our more vulnerable first 6 to 8 weeks? And what is that going to look like after? Who is going to be responsible for meals? And if we're not going to cook in the home, how are we going to outsource those things? What about our mental health, right? How do we know what could be signs and symptoms of my mood declining or my partner's mood declining, right? We know that dads also experience paternal postpartum depression. So we want to include their mental health in the conversation. We also talk about family, like who can be supports and allies and who are people that like we shouldn't be around in those first 2 weeks, first 4 weeks, right? And so having these conversations and formalizing it in a sit down written document can be a really helpful tool that we can start laying that groundwork as we head into the postpartum period and have that as a point of reference. We also know that by bringing partners into therapy, it allows it to it destigmatizes it, right? We're just having a conversation. We're not going to a couples therapist because our marriage is on the rocks. And so if we can get them in, and I always leverage baby, like, you know, at that time when we're thinking about baby, this just becomes a normal part of how we're caring for our family system. And then inviting partners back into session, if things should change or worsen, becomes infinitely easier.
I love that idea of making the partner like an ally beforehand, because if you can include them and you're both doing it as a team, like from all the aspects, and then talking about what that's gonna look like afterwards, like that feels like that would be so huge and change like the whole dynamic for the men going into this. I mean, that's amazing. I love that.
But we
Yeah,
think,
and
oh,
I'm sorry. I was gonna say one of the things too that we talk about in there, which we know comes up a lot and adds significant stress for mothers, is we talk about division of labor and how that's going to shift and change. And Chelsea kind of mentioned this, but who's doing what? But in the process of that, we're even just making that invisible labor more visible, right? By bringing it to the partner's awareness that like, this is what she's going to be doing and this is how you can help. And these are the things you're going to need to do. And these are all the things that are going through her mind in terms of this list of things. And it allows them to sort of have a discussion around, okay, I'm going to do those things while you're doing this, and then we're going to discuss it again. And we always talk about having these sort of summit meetings with your partner in the postpartum period once a week, or at least where you're sitting down and kind of talking through like, how do things go this week? What do we need to edit? What do we need to shift? How are you? What's going on with yourself? Because otherwise you're just sort of like ships passing in the night, and then women feel really alone, which leads to really like negative coping skills, ways to numb out, ways to sort of like manage their stress, and ways to sort of deal with whatever is internally going on with them in terms of those emotions.
Wow, you can really see that it's all connected. And I just chuckled a little because thinking about all the things that are going on in her head, like I don't think that they can comprehend everything that's going on in her
No.
head, but we can try. We can try to explain it.
Yes.
And I love this approach because I'm very much a planner, and so they talk a lot about having a birth plan, right? Which in my experience has never gone according to plan.
No.
Um, but you feel more comfortable going into it of like, I have this plan, and when something comes up, I can better shift because I have a direction of how I want things to look, right? So, and I love incorporating our partner. What if our partner is like, I don't like, I don't know how I can help. This is too overwhelming for me. What if, how does that look when our partner isn't being supportive?
Mhm.
Yeah, so one of the things, I mean, and that's not uncommon, right? I think that sometimes we think it's like, oh, he or she just doesn't care, or he or she isn't interested, or don't know, oftentimes we find that they're probably struggling with their own sense of adjustment, their own loss of autonomy and freedom, right? And so having conversations around not just what do I want you to do, but what are some of those barriers to you doing that, right? In figuring out, is there something else going on underneath it? I also know that we oftentimes expect our partner to read our mind of like, I just want you to cook dinner, right? And sometimes that can be, you might get pushback for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because, what you cook always gets complained about. Sometimes partners don't know how to cook, right? And so figuring out what could potentially get in the way of that. I think that um, something as simple as saying, like, we often talk about like maternal gatekeeping. I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase, but like if every time I'm, jumping in to change the diaper and I don't give you the opportunity to practice, your confidence is going to likely be pretty low, right? And so figuring out, it's never just as simple as I don't want to help. Oftentimes it's a myriad of different reasons. And so being able to, as Amber mentioned, having to check in with your partner, right? And having it not be from the point of complaining you're not doing this, but like, how are you doing? What's going on for you? Is often a way to better facilitate what's getting in the way of you being a part of our family team.
Mhm. That being said, I also am a realist, and I believe that we see lots of mothers where they are doing all of those things and their partners still aren't helping, and so
Yeah.
that does happen. And then so I feel like there's a lot of responsibility on mothers to be the communicators, to try to figure out what's going on, to sort of fix a lot of those problems, which I think end up lending itself to this feeling of burden that they feel. And so we do see a lot of moms who come in with that. Like, I'm being very assertive. I've been very clear. I've told them this is what I need, and that's still not happening. And so I do think that's a very real problem. I don't know that there's always a quick solution to it, because I think it's so much larger than just whatever's happening in that room. I think there's a much larger systemic narrative around that. But I think it also starts with, which I think is something that's important that we talk a lot about in therapy, which is boundaries. Boundaries for themselves with their partners, boundaries for themselves with their kids, boundaries for themselves with being able to take breaks, with being able to say, I don't have to be there all the time and feel bad about that, or you can take care of this and I don't need to be the person to do that. And kind of following through with those boundaries and saying, no, I'm going to go to the spa, or I'm going to go out with my friend and I need you to pick this up. And kind of sticking to that. We see a lot of women kind of set that boundary, and then they get frustrated or annoyed and they just do it anyway. And so then we're just sort of in this repeated cycle. So I think what Chelsea is suggesting is what we want in the ideal, but we also know that there's individual mental health that contributes to this, and narratives that have contributed to the way that we think and approach mothering and division of labor and all of that I think is at play.
That makes a lot of sense when you think about people. Nobody wants to feel helpless or unneeded.
Yeah.
So if men are and as to your point, like if their expectation is, oh, I don't have to do anything, and then all of a sudden there's all this stuff that they're supposed to do, that's going to be stressful. So I can see it on both sides, like me wanting to help because that's what we do. We're a team, but feeling like I'm not needed. Like when I did that same thing, like stepping in with the diapers and stuff, and not meaning to undermine him or take anything away from him, just that I thought I was doing him a favor. But we're not giving them the opportunity to help. And then if you have somebody who has that conditioning that we see so much about what the male's role is, if you start this process early on, at least if the mother is like aware and has a plan on how to handle it ahead of time, that makes it so much easier on the other side of it.
Yeah, one of the things that I encourage a lot of my couples to try is using Fair Play. It's a great resource. It really identifies that within any, parenting couple, there are up to 100 different tasks that the couple's doing, right? And someone has to do those tasks, right? And one of the founder, Eve Rodsky, she identifies that every hour is created equally, right? So if I'm nursing my child for an hour, and that means that you're prepping dinner, we're both doing an hour's work. And I think that sometimes, as Amber identified, is that it's just that I don't want, I see you over there sitting on the couch. I'm not realizing that you're actually working, right? And that breastfeeding takes a ton of energy. It takes a ton of time. It's incredibly exhausting. And so I just kind of say, well, you don't really need a spa day because you're not doing anything. And so a lot of this is educating and reframing some of the narratives we have about women and the workload and what it actually takes to be the person who not only preps the dinner, but thinks about the dinner, has the running shopping list, make sure it's different than the week before, make sure that everyone in the family is going to eat it, right? So if someone walks in and says, how can I help? You're burdening them with one more thing to have to do. Now I have to explain to you how to help, right? So a lot of this is a big systemic change in terms of the framework of how we see what the domestic household all entails and how we make sure that an hour working, and you're getting paid $500 an hour is the same as an hour of breastfeeding because we're both contributing to our family.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chelsea, I think that narrative also starts with the mother seeing that what they're doing is also productive, and that part seems to be disconnected a lot. That I feel like I haven't done anything all day long. The house is a mess, and I still need to do more. And I'm like, you literally kept a human alive. Like you were so productive all day long. You just can't see the visual outcome of that right away, right? And so our definition of productivity is tied to our self-worth, which is tied to boundaries, which is tied to self-care, which is tied to poor coping mechanisms and stress and things that lead to drinking or whatever that is maybe not going to be as helpful for them.
Yep, I can relate to that. It's really, it really is. It's a redefining, right? Of, well, I think too, like our worth and our value, right? Because like I put so much emphasis on my value of working, right? And then I'm out of work. I'm with this teeny tiny baby and the house is a bombshell, and like I have assigned my worth to these things that I do, right? And it's really, I mean, it's a big, it is a lot of work to go in and be like, I'm going to redefine my whole value system. And so one, realizing that you're not alone in this, that this is something that I'm going to say the majority of moms go through. And you don't have to do it all alone. Like, sure, yeah, you can. You're a strong mama. You can do like anything. You gave life, you created it and brought it here. And like, yeah, you can do anything. And you can also work with people who have the skills that can help walk you through this so that you're not pulling your hair out during it.
Yeah. I think there's something about, I see sometimes that, women think that they have to suffer more than I think maybe they actually need to. And there is some I think reinforcement of that around the dismissiveness of like women being in pain or suffering and sort of just saying that that's okay. And so I think they believe that that's something that they should just push through or suffer through to some extent. That is, I think, tied into that narrative in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
That's very interesting. And I'm wondering too, this difference between maternal gatekeeping and what if it's like these just like strong these mama bear instincts where we're like, I have to hold, like, that's my baby. I have to protect, nobody else touch, which is usually more our first kids, right? Are we right? Yeah.
Yes.
And then
Mhm.
second kids are like, please take this baby. And so how do we work with moms who feel that way of like, I have to do everything for this baby. Like I'm the one, right? I think that that's more than a maternal gatekeeping of like, it's more survival based, right?
Mm. Yeah.
I think it's complicated like a lot of things. It
Yeah.
makes me think about like checking in around their level of anxiety
Mhm.
and where that's coming from and sort of their stories around like what they think what tells them that they're a good mother. Is it doing all of those things?
Mhm.
Which is tied into a lot of different pieces. So I think it is a little more complex. And that's part of what we do in therapy is I don't like we talked about in the beginning, it's not this one fit. There's sort of this like pulling one thread and then we see another thread. We see like a story they have built up around that. We see a family of origin belief system. We see all these different pieces that you're sort of untangling that maybe have contributed to that and
Yeah, and
biology.
if you don't know you have anxiety or maybe sometimes pregnancy can trigger that anxiety. What anxiety is all these irrational fears that are playing out in your mind. So we're imagining all the worst things that can happen to our baby and we're getting bombarded with all the stuff that it's possible to happen, like the commercials about how your baby should sleep and it's changed how many times now, like all of that stuff, and we imagine the worst case scenario so that like I know I did that, like I wanted to be there for everything to make sure nothing went wrong. And that's too much.
Yes, it's definitely too much. And I think, we find that women who have had a history of anxiety, it's likely going to resurface in the postpartum period. We also know that for a lot of people, their hormones are more susceptible, right? So once you deliver that placenta and you deliver a baby, your hormones are going to shift and drop. And then you layer on sleep deprivation and you layer on the stress of learning a new job. And you layer on all those external messages to be perfect or sleep, you put your kid in the right bassinet in the right way. And so it is complicated, right? And it's never just one thing. And therefore treatment is going to look very different too, right? For some women, it's going to look like asking their partner to help make sure she sleeps. For other women, it's going to look like having her see a perinatal reproductive psychiatrist to help them talk about medication options. For some people, it's going to be identifying healthy coping behaviors, which might look like cognitive shifts or behavioral shifts or adding things or subtracting things. It isn't, but I think that question of why is this mama bear instinct coming up is always a really, really good one and definitely a good place to start because it is never just one thing, right? I also always encourage my moms to bring their babies in because we don't know what a normal baby is, right? There's no such thing. And so that dyadic exchange between mom and baby is always also at play too, right? We talk about what does mom need to do, but sometimes babies need support for a
Mhm.
variety of different reasons, right? It could be physical, they might need to meet with, have a pediatric massage or chiropractic adjustment, but they might also need additional support of that dyad.
Mhm. Yeah, I also think we see maternal anxiety in general somewhat being minimized because we just think it's normal for mothers to feel anxious, which it is. And also like there's a point where it's maybe not healthy or normal. And I think that we can sometimes see people endorsing like symptoms of depression, but not necessarily saying that they're anxious. And in part, I think sometimes it makes them feel like they're better mothers, like they're not going to miss anything. And so it's not necessarily always seen as being problematic in some way. Like we expect that of mothers to be anxious and worried. And in fact, we might judge you if you're not, right? Like if you're not worried about your baby, what does that say about you? Right? If you're not anxious about your baby, what does that say about you? And so it puts them in a bit of a bind,
Right.
right?
And if you're too anxious, then you're
Yeah,
a helicopter mom. So you're kind of,
you're
yeah.
screwed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's so key to look at these as indicator lights, right? Of, oh, this light's going off. This is maybe something that I need to pay attention to and talk to somebody with, right? Like when my oil light is going off, I'm not like, let me get underneath the hood, right? I'm like, I'm gonna go bring that in and talk to somebody about it. And as coaches, we really work on what's underneath, like the thoughts, the beliefs, the stories, right? We're obviously not therapists and trained like you, of going back into like the background and the history and how everything led up to here, but more of understanding what these, how these thoughts and beliefs and stories are causing us to behave and act. And you mentioned this, what is a good mother? And I think that story, that belief, that thought comes into play with our work a lot.
I bet. It comes into work, I think, with every mother, to be honest, on some level, like irrespective of whether they're struggling with a substance use issue or an eating disorder or a conflict in their relationship. There's this element of that that's always at play, and the definition of that, where it came from. Sometimes we see people from their family of origin who had maybe not a good role modeling, and they go the opposite direction. And so there's all these little mediating factors that can contribute to that, where that story actually came from, including like influences from societal messages and even partners and other mothers too actually contribute to that. We have a lot of comparisons that happen online around, I'm not as good as somebody else who's posting all these pictures. And so we get this idea around what we think it's supposed to look like without really any details of that person's life.
Yeah, I was struggling a lot after this last, actually both babies. But going to talk to this time, I was better equipped to go and talk to people. The first time I thought like, oh, there's something wrong with me that I'm feeling all these feelings, right? But this time when I talked to the doctor and explaining the anxiety, and he's like, don't go on social media. I'm like, I know that. I know that. Um, but gosh, I just think that there is these kinds of conversations can open the door to realize that what we're saying to each other, what we're doing to each other is not helping us, through judgments of who's parenting this way and who's parenting that way, and this is the right way and that's the wrong way, right? And opening these conversations of, I'm not going to be the same kind of parent as you because our families are different and our circumstances are different. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to figure out what's best for us. And I think that a lot of times just merely acknowledging that I am doing the best that I can with the tools and the resources that I have available lets off so much of that mom guilt, so much shame, so much judgment of like, yeah, I am trying really, really hard here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can equip myself with more tools and resources by,
Mm-hmm.
Networking with other people who are going through this or have experience or education, right?
Yeah.
If you let go of that comparison and you can start sharing information without judging each other, like then you feel like more confident about your own abilities, and then then you share things that I wouldn't have thought of. Like, thank you for sharing that because I didn't even think of that. That's so great. Like that's what we should be doing to lift each other up instead of saying, "Oh, I'm not doing a good enough job," or I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's what we hope that doing something like this will help create.
Yeah. I mean, we always tell all of our clients that, perfect mothering only exists before you have a child. So, um, and also that, we can control for all of these variables. We can plan for everything. And the one thing we can't control for is the temperament of our child. We have no idea who we're getting, right? And so the idea of like pre-designing who I'm going to be as a parent before I've met my kid is just, it doesn't make any sense. And we don't know how we're going to be. I always tell people like, they'll say, well, I'm really worried about this or that. And I'm like, I don't know how you're going to be with sleep deprivation, because unless I put you through like sleep deprivation camp for like, a month straight, I have no idea what's going to happen to your mood. Like there's no way to predict those variables. And so opening up and having a really flexible narrative around, like, I'm open to the possibility of this is what I would hope to be like, and these are my value systems, but I'm going to edit that as I'm getting new information versus I have this pre-designed perspective about what I'm going to do. And then when I get there and it doesn't happen, that must mean that I suck, right? Or that there's something wrong with me, or that I'm not doing well enough as a mother in some capacity. When you can't make a comparison of a kid who's screaming through the night and doesn't sleep with somebody whose baby is sleeping through the night. Like you're not going to be the same parent and you're not going to be the same functional person. And so there's not a comparison to be made without knowing. You'd have to have the exact same scenario with the exact same family system, the exact same family history, and then you can make a comparison. But even then, there's so many mediating factors around that.
And anyone who has had more than one kid knows that it's never the same with one kid as it is with the other. So
No.
even if I had the identical, I have different experience because I had the first one. And even if that same next child is exactly the same, it's still going to be different, but they're never the same. And
No.
the whole experience, both of my kids were night and day different. And so knowing that ahead of time, like preparing mothers that have a kid already and think that, oh, okay, I've got all the tools I need because I've been through this. Just I would encourage them to think you can never have too many tools. Like you can never not be prepared for the way that the world changes and the different things that are out there and what other things you might face. So getting prepared for that, the fact that it's different, staying open and flexible and like being curious to learn is going to be huge.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You don't know what your child's going to be like. You also don't know what you're going to be like. You also don't know what your support system is going to be like. People constantly surprise you in the postpartum period. And I think too, we don't know what's going to come up for a lot of our moms, right? Once they transition into motherhood. Some of those stories, kind of the things that they experienced as child and they experienced as a child looking at their mother through their eyes, like that stuff shows up. And sometimes it's for the better, and sometimes it is incredibly stressful and can be really triggering and cause us to, turn to potentially maladaptive ways of coping because, like you said, this is hard stuff to talk about, right? It isn't just like, which carrier do you get? You can be like, I'm having these like old feelings show up. Who do I talk to about it? Because maybe Amber isn't going to really understand what I'm going through, right? And so a lot of women do keep these things to themselves. Right. And so that idea of joining a support group, that idea of talking to other mothers about how you're actually really doing, making sure that if you're not talking to another mother or a friend, that maybe you are talking to a provider, right? Because they might not have additional resources and how to support you.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes too, I think we find that you might go to that support group and it might not be the right one for you. And you might find that everybody there is not necessarily being open with their experiences. And I've had that happen with patients before where they go to a group and everyone's just talking about how everything is amazing and wonderful, and it makes them feel worse sometimes. And so giving them permission to go to that, and then maybe it's not the right fit for what they need in that season of life. Maybe those people are at a different season of life. Maybe they had a easy sleeper. Maybe they had 15 people helping them in the middle of the night. Like we don't know all of those stories. And so giving them permission to seek those out, but also to trust their intuition about what they need. I feel like we tell mothers a lot about that they're already equipped to manage babies. And I don't think that that's true, but I do think that they have intuition, and we've been taught to ignore intuition all the time. Like, I'm really tired, I need to sleep. No, I shouldn't. I should be able to get through this. No, actually, your intuition told you that you were tired and you need to ask for help and that you can rest. Or your intuition told you that this support group was not the good place for me, but I'm going to bypass that because my therapist told me I should go and everybody else here seems fine.
Right.
And so really like trusting that part of themselves, which is hard for new mothers because they don't trust themselves.
Well, and they're exhausted, right?
They're
Like
exhausted. Yeah, exactly. Everything looks blurry,
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up because that was really the point that I wanted to make, is that we have these intuitions and it's a learning to trust ourselves, right? When we stop trusting ourselves, I think that's when we see so many issues because we're detaching from ourselves, right? And we're saying that I'm not capable, I'm not listening to what I need. And like I'm the best judge of what I need, right? Of being able to listen to that. And so it is really like a honing of trusting yourself, and what happens when we don't. We start looking for external things to
Mhm.
start filling those internal things that we're not listening to, that we're not paying attention to, that are causing conflict within us.
Mhm. Sometimes our intuition can tell us, I think, about the kind of help we need, but then there's a barrier to that, right? There can be a sense of shame around asking for that support or seeking that out. And so I do think it's complex in that way. And so typically what I have recommended for people is like to trust your intuition. You don't always know what it means, but to give yourself a minute to like just pull back. I mean, I teach my daughter this all the time, and she's 12. You know what? That little thing that came up for you when you walked into that room, and it felt like something was off about it, and you couldn't make sense of it, but we're not going to ignore it. So let's just like hold on to it. Let's figure out what that means and kind of reflect on it. And then maybe it'll become more clear what you need to move from there, or what's getting in the way of like potentially that intuition that you have about that experience.
Yeah, I love that. That's so great. And so a lot of times we see this this conflict inside of ourselves play out, and that leads us reaching for unhealthy coping mechanisms. And also, it is our external relationships, right? And sometimes I love that you suggested Fair Play, Chelsea, and I know that you're a facilitator with them, which I wasn't familiar with until I started doing some research. But sometimes our partners aren't on board for the way that we want to live our life, or we had an idea, we had an agreement of how we were going to do things, and then somebody decided that they didn't want to do it that way, or it got too hard, or whatever, the issue may be. And what I find a lot of times is the women that we have worked with are like, I need to make healthy changes in my life, I need these things for myself, and my partner is not willing, right? I want to quit drinking. I want to cut back on drinking. I want healthy coping mechanisms. I want to go on walks and eat healthy and all of these things. And my partner isn't willing to do it. So, like, it's either me or my relationship. And and most of the times they feel like they have to pick their relationship.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sometimes, I always think about some of those conversations, right? So typically, a woman in this scenario, right, she might have been thinking about quitting drinking for, I don't know how long before you actually finally get help and make that decision, right? So sometimes it is that conversation of catching your partner up to speed, right? You have thought about your relationship to alcohol for years before you actually made the call to you, Stephanie, and said like, hey, I need some help, right? And now I'm going to implement it. And so you spent maybe about 4 or 5 years planning this, and they've heard about this and about the changes you want to make for a couple of weeks. So I always think about starting small, right? Identifying what are those resources. If it's financial, here's how we get the money for X, Y, and Z. If it's time, here's how we support you in that time, right? And so I think sometimes having a conversation that includes this is what I need and this is how I'm going to get it isn't just as that simple, right? It's talking about some of those identified, like how do we problem solve, right? And coming back to what is it that we both want. You might also find that sometimes your partner doesn't want you to change, right? They fell in love with you when you were drinking, and that's what the foundation of your relationship has been. And so it might require more than just a conversation, right? It might require therapy. It might require the opportunity to say, like, what does our relationship look like with alcohol and with being healthy? It could bring up a variety of different feelings for your partner, right? So typically, if you're at that kind of impasse, I always recommend that couples do seek additional support, because playing the fair play deck of cards isn't going to help them, right? They're gonna they're gonna need a little bit more than that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's challenging too because I think everybody's relationship and their tolerance for what is problematic with alcohol is really varies, and our culture typically normalizes it a lot, and we see it a lot in the mommy culture. Like we encourage mothers to go drink, we encourage them to have their outlets, we encourage them to meet up with their friends for mommy wine hour, we encourage mommy juice in bottles. Like, I mean, we wouldn't do that with any other substance, and so it is really fascinating, that piece of it, because I think it's confusing if someone does want to stop, if their partner is like, well, this is how we relate to people, like Chelsea's saying, this is our social relationships. And not doing that is going to change all of that. It makes people uncomfortable at times. And so I think that part is really hard for relationships to navigate, and social relationships too. And there's so many layers of loss around that because people look at it weird or they judge it differently, because they're not doing that, because they don't see it as problematic. And it's not always problematic. It just can become quickly problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I think that there is a lot here for women to walk away to at least think about, right? About how they're defining things, how they're framing things, and to get curious about maybe what ideas aren't serving them, whether it's being a good mother, whether it's, alcohol is the thing that's holding us all together, or whether it's I need to not gatekeep, and I need to, or like how am I gatekeeping, right? And get curious about that. How can I ask for help? How can I allow other people to participate in this? So a lot to take away from this. And you also have a free gift today to share with people. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that real quick?
Yeah, one of the things that Amber and I find often is that self-care looks very different for new moms. And something about grabbing a glass of wine at 5 o'clock, the laundry becomes more fun. I can still take care of my kids. And I can also start to kind of escape, right? Like typically that doesn't just happen at 5. You start thinking about that early throughout the day, right? Like I just got to get to 5. And so being in that mind frame can often take away from your ability to be present with yourself, to be present with your kids, to listen to what else is going on with you. And so we created a freebie with some of our favorite self-care exercises or coping skills so you can better be present in your day-to-day with your child. And you can also regulate some of the emotional distress that shows up when your child is crying or they're fighting a nap or they're fighting bedtime. And you know that that will kind of melt away some or dial back just a little once you pour yourself a glass of wine. We just, not necessarily that the glass of wine isn't an option, but that you have other things at your disposal as well. And so we look forward to sharing that freebie with you. We're going to be hosting that on our Instagram page. So go ahead, follow us, and then you can click on our link and you'll be able to access it from there.
And where is your Instagram? Where can they find you?
Instagram is at Spark Mamas. Yep.
Perfect. And we'll include that link in the notes as well.
Cool.
Well, thank you both so much for your time today. This has been really insightful, and I think it gives women a lot to think about and to move towards. Thank you.
Thank you
you
for the
both for
discussion.
joining. Yeah.